right, today we are going to be going over the top 10 cards in every single set of Scarlet and Violet. This may be a longer video, so buckle up. I did put a lot of time into this very simple table, so if you could leave a like, comment, and subscribe down below, that would be greatly appreciated. We'll go through the sets pretty quickly, or as quickly as I can, and then at the very end, we'll look at an overall stats summary table that I put together. Just sort of looking at these sets at a bird's eye view, looking at them on a grander scale. Now, I did take all this market data from TCG Player. I did highlight a few cards that I think are my personal favorites for future potential growth. And then I also went ahead and put my own guess on the probability that certain sets will get either a reprint or a restock in the future. And that is using the culmination of opinions and information from YouTubers and possibly some of their distributors and store owners, and then also just my personal opinion based on relative to the booster box prices and singles prices if it looks like Pokemon would reprint the set, which again, we could be totally wrong on all this. They could reprint it all into the ground, but this set at this point we're getting pretty far into the era where it does not look like they'll be able to reprint everything. It seems like they're really sticking to the specialty sets, getting a lot of reprints. So let's jump right into it, starting with Scarlet and Violet base. You can see the top 3 cards in the set sums up to $86, which is the Gardevoir, Miriam, and Ralts. And then the total for the top 10 cards in Scarlet Violet base is $193. There's 24 IRs, 10 SIRs for a total of 34 hits. The booster box is currently sitting at $119.56 as of today, December 17th, around 8 p.m.-ish PST. Now, like I said, the cards highlighted in yellow are ones that I personally like and think have some room for growth potential. We got the Gardevoir EX. Not going to go into too much detail on this one. 29% over the last 3 months, 75% over the last year. Great looking card, cheap SIR. Don't see why it can't have room to grow. Miriam, sort of the same thing. It's a little bit of an exception because I'm not too fond of the trainer SIR so far. They're okay, but this Miriam one, great artwork. I think it's sort of already bottomed out over the last year, so it's about where it was a year ago. It's not that easy to grade. As far as I'm aware, I think it's like 50% PSA 10. I mean, that's not terrible, but I don't think it's too easy. And I think at $27, what is it? $26.84. I really like this card and think it could go up in the future. My other picks, which I'm not going to go too in depth on, the Miraidon and the Coriodon SIR. Those are the face of the video games for Scarlet and Violet. Really like those. And then the Drowsy, I really like as an IR. I think it's undervalued. Okay, moving on to Paldea Evolved. We obviously have the Magikarp, which has crossed $200. The booster box currently sitting at $147.82. Paldea Evolved is the deepest set in the Scarlet Violet era with 36 IRs, 15 SIRs for a total of 51 hits, which is awesome. Honestly, you could probably categorize this one as low for reprints and restocks, but I just put it as moderate just because the box price keeps going back up. I have no idea what Pokemon might do, but they seem to just do a little bit of a mini resupply recently, and we'll see what happens to the box. But I actually like Paldea even at its current price. My top 3 picks right now is definitely the Tyranitar, Raichu, and Sprigatito. My logic for the Tyranitar and Raichu essentially is that there's other IRs like the Groudon, Squirtle from Stellar Crown, all the 151 IRs that are crossing that $40, $50, $60 price range. I think that these two especially could easily hit $50+ dollars. Tyranitar's fan favorite. Raichu is a fan favorite. Also the evolution of Pikachu, which is the mascot of Pokemon. The other card that I like is actually the Sprigatito IR. Seems to be the most popular starter for Scarlet Violet era. Also, if you look at it, 58% increase in the last 3 months, 78% on the year. I think it's like $150 or $200 maybe in a PSA 10. I can't remember. Haven't checked in a while, but I like this card. Great artwork. Best starter. Now, moving on to Obsidian Flames, we obviously have the Charizard as the cornerstone of this set. The set drops off really fast in terms of top 10 value. You can see it goes from $62 to $25 right away. You've got the Charizard, the Ninetales right here. So there's the Charizard, Ninetales. You got the Golden Charizard. My top ones that I liked for this set obviously the Charizard is the chase card. It's going for like 300 something dollars in a PSA 10 because I think it's pretty difficult to grade. Similarly, the Ninetales about 17 or $18, not the easiest to grade. I think it's like 150, 175 in a PSA 10 right now. But I mean, if you look at the growth for it, it's obvious to everyone at this point. 64% in the last 3 months, 148% on the year. This card was like $7 or $8 a year ago. Crazy. My other sleeper pick, I won't say it's a sleeper pick, but the card that I like at the current price is this Scizor still. Again, kind of difficult to grade a lot of these Obsidian Flames cards from what I can tell. Scizor was like a $3 card last year. 97% in the last 3 months, 75% in last year. But, you know, when you're looking at it and it's next to Gloom and the Pidgeir, love the Pidgeir, by the way. I think that the Scizor has a lot more room to grow. Again, not telling anyone or giving them financial advice to invest in these. I'm just looking at it from my own personal standpoint. If I were to pick a few of these cards in each set to take with me long term or medium term or make grading plays, these are the cards that I would be looking at. All the stuff in between is a little bit harder to make those plays on from what I can tell. Now, Obsidian Flames is one of the sets with the lowest quantity of hits. It has 12 IRs, 6 SIRs for a total of 18 hits. So theoretically, it can be easier to pull some of these cards, but I just don't think this set was well received, as well received as people thought it would be when it came out. Now, moving on to our no-brainer set is 151. I'm personally not really a fan of any of the cards at the current prices. I put Blastoise and Alakazam down just because I don't think the Alakazam is too bad at $45. And the reason I put Blastoise down is because recently now the Venusaur has actually crossed over and become more expensive on TCG market price than the Blastoise. I think historically Blastoise has always been the second most popular third evolution starter. So it was Charmander, Squirtle, then Bulbasaur almost always. And so I think I would rather make a play on Blastoise at its current price than I would Venusaur, and that's really the only reason why I highlighted that one. I did put a note down here that I would not be buying 151 at the current market price of 100% market, just because I think we all know that Blooming Waters special or collection box is on its way soon, and that, you know, theoretically the prices of some of these cards could go down a decent amount if there's a significant amount of 151 still being added to the market, which I think everyone is under the impression that it will. Still, I like that Alakazam at that price point. Obviously, all these cards are great. Like, they keep going up in price at no matter how much Pokemon reprints. I'm just purely trying to make a case that I'm not a huge fan of buying all these at, I'm not a huge fan of buying Charmander IR at $54, just not knowing what the future reprint or restock situation could look like. But the regular ETB prices for 151 right now is $127, which is crazy. That's over double MSRP. The set has 16 IRs, 7 SIRs for a total of 23 hits. Pretty much all of them are bangers universally across the board. 151 is going to do great in the foreseeable future. Obviously, I just wouldn't be making plays exactly at these prices, but who knows? I honestly, this set continues to surprise me and everyone else, I think. So do with that information as you will. I just think this is the only set so far that we are like confirmed 100% getting reprints for, or restock, whatever you want to call it, via that Blooming Waters collection box. But 151 probably going to be regarded as one of the best sets of all time easily. All right, next up we got Paradox Rift, which I think is probably I'll say that in Temporal, but probably for price right now, Paradox Rift is one of the best sleeper sets, I think. I put the reprint potential at low to moderate just because, people like Rudy and other YouTubers are assuming that SVO1 to SVO4 have a lower likelihood of getting a massive reprint as the second half of Scarlet and Violet does, which I would sort of agree with. Paradox Rift has had a ridiculous amount of supply of booster boxes on the market for a long time. So we're just now starting to see the booster box price move recently with all the other Scarlet Violet sets. But I really like Paradox Rift. It's the second deepest set in terms of hits. Has 34 IRs, 15 SIRs. So it's not super easy to hit all of these cards necessarily. I do think the pull rates were a little bit easier than the latter half think Temporal Forces is when it started to really get difficult to pull some of these SIRs, but when you have that many, it is still not easy. You know, you could hit one of the lower end SIRs and not get the Roaring Moon or Altaria, for example. Speaking of which, as you can see, those 4 highlighted cards just so happen to be the 4 most expensive cards. I still like them all at their current prices. The Groudon at $62. Again, I'm sort of thinking of this relative to where I could see this card being, or, you know, the Groudon is such a good looking card. You could easily see people paying $100 for this card in the future. It's not a question of whether or not it will happen. It's kind of a question of when, in my opinion. If the Magikarp can hit 200, I don't see why the Groudon can't reach 100. Again, I'm not telling you to invest in the card right now, and I'm not saying it's going to go to 100. I'm just saying we've seen it sort of push that price point up in the 70s a few times, and it seems to just keep wanting to go up. Over the year, 151% up. Last 3 months, 31%. You know, it's pushed 40s and then 50s and then 60s. You've seen sales in the 70s, but that's definitely not where it's landed currently. But I really like the Groudon. I also am a huge fan of some of these Paradox Pokemon. I really like the Roaring Moon. I think it's one of the better SIR artworks. Reminds us all of Salamence, obviously, which is a very popular species. Sitting at $56, kind of right in the middle there, where it's like just on the borderline of not wanting to spend that much, but for that artwork, I really don't mind it at that price point. I know I picked up a few of them at like 80, 85% market. Altaria, I think, is probably one of the bigger sleepers, and same with the Iron Valiant, which I'll pull up here. This Altaria is super reminiscent of the Aerodactyl alt art to me. Altaria sort of reminds me of like a Gardevoir-esque Pokemon, where it's like, it's not everyone's favorite, but for whatever reason, it continues to do well over time. It doesn't have crazy growth in the last year. It's about 33%. And then the last 3 months, 33% as well. I just think at $33, $34, I still like this card. I could easily see it being a $40, $50 card, especially if we don't get any massive more reprints of Paradox Rift. And like we were discussing, how difficult it can be to pull these with how many SIRs there are in the set. So I think Iron Valiant is probably my biggest sleeper card for all of Paradox Rift. And if you look at the year chart, it's actually down 40%. So I really do like it at $32 here. It was at $54, $55 a year ago. And now in the last 3 months, especially the last month or so, it's up 60%. It went from about $20 to $32, $33. So I really like Iron Valiant. I'm a firm believer in it. The Paradox Rift booster boxes are sitting at about $121, which is not bad at all. Again, relative to the prices of some of the other sets and their singles inside, I really am a fan of Paradox Rift. Moving on to Paldean Fates, I am not going to dwell on this one. Similar to 151, this set has a pretty high likelihood of getting more reprints, I think. We see that with a lot of the specialty sets. I'm also not a huge fan of just the value, how heavily skewed it is towards the Mew and Charizard. Again, the Mew has seen probably some of the most growth we've seen in all of Scarlet Violet era, up almost 200% on the year. Similar in the last 3 months. I think it went from like $80 to $300. So ridiculous card, but I am a big fan. The two that I highlighted are the Gardevoir. I really like this card. Again, Gardevoir sort of is like a sleeper Pokemon that ends up doing really well for whatever reason. So I really like the Gardevoir. And then I also actually like this Iono SIR. I know earlier I talked about not really wanting to invest in a lot of the SIR trainers, but the Miriam from Scarlet Violet base I really like. And this is probably my second favorite SIR, just looks wise and also price point. It's really pretty cheap, $22. It's down 65% on the year, guys. I'm not saying it couldn't continue to go down, but I'm just saying at $20, I like it a lot more as a future investment than I do when it was at $67 a year ago. And look how many items were selling, 70, 80 items. And that was during a quote unquote bear market. So who knows what this card could do. Again, there's not really much movement, only 5% increase in the last 3 months, but I really like the look of this card. And I do think it is a sleeper in Paldean Fates. All right, moving on to my favorite set in the Scarlet Violet era, Temporal Forces. This set is an absolute banger. I still think a lot of the cards are undervalued. I'm not going to go into it too deep. The booster box is sitting at $134.82. I put the reprint probability as high to moderate just because it's sort of assumed by everyone that from Paldean Fates forward, SV 4.5 to now Surging Sparks SV08, that the reprint probability of some of these boxes is really, really high or likely, just because Twilight, Surging, they're all $150, $200 boxes. The singles are hundreds of dollars. So it's getting to the point where these sets are a little bit more likely to get reprints than ones like Paradox Rift, Obsidian Flames, that already saw a ridiculous amount on the market for a while. So my favorite picks from Temporal are the Iron Crown SIR, Morty's Conviction, and the Ghastly. Obviously, love the Raging Bolt, Walking Wake, all those cards. I just think at the current prices, I still think the Iron Crown is probably the biggest sleeper, in the sense that, at one point it was more expensive than the Raging Bolt. Yeah, it was close to $100 card, and I know that the PSA 10s were like $250 or $300 when this thing first came out. Again, that's normal for a lot of sets when they first come out. The first to market plays are really expensive, but this card is super sick. I really am a fan of it, and yeah, I think it has room to grow. Morty's Conviction and Ghastly, I think, are pretty straightforward. Extremely popular Pokemon, sitting at around $37 for the Morty's Conviction. Great artwork. And the Ghastly, which is probably one of the best IRs out there right now, sitting at $30, up 43% in the last 3 months, 92% on the year. Really like the Ghastly. It's showing that it can rebound multiple times. We've seen it hit 30, come back down to 20, hit 33, come back down to 20, and now it's pushing into the 30s again. I don't see why this card can't be a $40, $45, $50 card eventually. And the PSA 10s right now, I think, are $160, $170. So really like the Ghastly. Temporal's sort of right in the middle of the road in terms of hits. You have 22 IRs and 10 SIRs, but I think all the SIRs pretty much, maybe except for one of them, I can't even remember, are all bangers. I absolutely will vouch for Temporal till the end of the earth. I think the next few sets are going to be pretty straightforward, just because I'm going to categorize all of them as a higher reprint probability for the most part. We have Twilight Masquerade, which I'm not the biggest fan of the set. I do like actually a lot of the Ogre Pond Pokemon, which a lot of people don't like. I like the Blood Moon Ursaluna. I just am not a huge fan of the current prices and the discrepancy between the Greninja going from $330 to the next highest card is Carmine at $67. It's too big of a jump for me, and I don't like it at the current prices, especially if more reprints are imminent. But who knows? It proved to be a much more popular set than everyone anticipated, just because that Greninja shot up from $120 to $200 to $300. But to me, that's not really a good reason to want to invest long term in some of these cards. I did put the highlight as the EVIR. I think Eevee is and evolutions are pretty much bulletproof at this point. Even at $65, if you can get this thing at like $50, $55, I think it's a great buy. Artwork is incredible. The evolutions have proved that they can stand the test of time. I don't mind this card at $60, to be honest. So similar to Temporal, Twilight is right in the middle of the road in terms of the number of hits. You've got 32 total hits with 21 IRs, 11 SIRs. The booster box right now is sitting at $160.37, which is very pricey. But like I said, I think the likelihood that this set gets reprinted is pretty likely. Moving right along to Shrouded Fable, which seems to be the least popular set of Scarlet Violet so far, along with Obsidian Flames maybe, and maybe Scarlet Violet Base. You got your ETBs sitting below MSRP, I believe, at $37. The regular ETBs, that is. Total hits, we have 15 IRs, 5 SIRs. I put reprint probability as a moderate for this one just because it's a newer set and it's a specialty set, but there's thousands and thousands of ETBs out there, people just dumping them. So I don't know if, based on the price point and just like the volume of people trying to dump stuff, if Pokemon would reprint it. Who knows though? I wouldn't put it past them at this point. But some of the cards that I highlighted are pretty obvious ones, but they're all IRs in this case. I don't think any of the top chases I would be after. Most of them are for playability. That's why they're so popular. But the ones that I like, oh, you can't see that. The ones that I like are the Persian IR sitting at $27. You have the Duskull IR at $24, Houndoom IR at $23 to $60, and the Dusknoir IR at 23.55, as well as the Dusclops, but it wasn't in the top 10, so I didn't include it. But I really like that line, that evolution line of IRs in the mid 20s. I still think they're a good pickup, probably, if you can get them in that $15-$20 range, even better. Same goes for the Houndoom. Very popular Pokemon, great artwork. Don't see why it can't go up. Persian, I think especially with that upcoming Rocket set, Persian is going to probably make a run to $35-$40 if I had to guess. Again, not trying to give financial advice. I'm just saying that's kind of the trend we've seen when new sets release that sort of bring back some of these very special, very fan favorite Pokemon. So I think Shrouded kind of gets a bad rap, but I think that's maybe just because the top chases aren't popular Pokemon. But those IRs I think are killer and I think can do well long term. Okay, moving right along to Stellar Crown. The booster box sitting at $131.92. You have a total of 19 hits, 13 IRs, 6 SIRs, so not a very deep set. The two cards that I like the most from this set, and to no one's surprise, are still the Bulbasaur and the Squirtle. I think even at the current price points, I wouldn't be buying them necessarily at $50 each, but I think they're ones to keep your eyes on. I posted on my Instagram. I wouldn't be like totally shocked if I saw the Squirtle at one point flipping the Terapagos headed towards $100, and the same with the Bulbasaur. So the Terapagos seems to just be going down, and those two seem to just be going up. So who knows? Yeah, so I really like those two cards. The rest of the set is kind of meh. There are some nice cards in there. I like the Briar SIR. I like the Hydrapple SIR. I do like the Terapagos as well. But if we're looking at it as an investment compared to other cards or other sets, I don't see a case to be made really right now on them, but maybe in the near future. Yeah, so I mainly just put Stellar as a moderate to high reprint probability, mainly just because it's a newer set. It's not quite as popular as, Twilight, Surging, Temporal, so maybe there's a chance it doesn't get as heavy of a reprint, or maybe it doesn't get a reprint at all, but it's still, I wouldn't put it as a low probability just because of how new it is. And for the most recent and probably most self-explanatory set, we have Surging Sparks. Top three cards, the Pikachu SIR, the Latios SIR, and the Pikachu Gold card. All three of those cards together combined for a whopping $850. The total of the top 10 cards in the set is $1,400 almost. Booster box is sitting at $212. Number of hits, we got 34. We have 23 IRs, 11 SIRs. I put the reprint probability for this set as very, very high, just for obvious reasons. It's a $200 booster box within a month and is by far the most popular Scarlet and Violet era main set. So, a lot of the specialty sets may get reprints. I think this would be one of the booster box sets to get some pretty heavy reprints. So some of the cards that I picked as my favorites, maybe not at the current price point, but long term, I really do like this Latios and the Latios, mainly because they have those combining artworks. We've seen what happened to those tag team alt arts. Again, that's just a single card. It's a very unique card, the chase card of Team Up, but it wasn't always the most popular card. So I don't see why these cards couldn't go on a run again in the future. Maybe if there is a heavy reprint or we do see a huge restock of Surging and a bunch of these flood the market and you see these cards drop 20, 30, 40%, it might be a good time to pick them up. I wrote down here, similar to 151, I would not be buying these cards at 100% market right now. If you can get them for 80, 85%, which might seem out of this world to do, but as someone who's had a limited vending experience, you definitely can get some of these chase cards well under market or trade into them at good percentages. And then the other card I picked, again, I'm not a huge fan of Trainer SIRs long term, but I do really like this Jasmine's Gaze. It's sitting at $45. Again, if they have more reprints, it probably will continue to come down. But if it hits that sort of $30 price range, I think this is probably a pretty safe buy at that point. But at 45 right now, it's not my favorite. I just wanted to mark it down to let everyone know that it's sort of on my radar, but it's not something to go crazy over or jump on right away. All right, so we've made it to the last slide. I just wanted to quickly show you some interesting things you can do with these numbers, which is, sorting from high to low of these different columns. So if we sort from high to low on the booster box and ETB prices, Again, the specialty sets, I didn't want to include the PC ETBs because not everyone has access to them as easily, but obviously we have Surging, Twilight, Paldea, Temporal, Obsidian Flames, Stellar Crown, 151 regular ETB, Paradox Rift, SV Base, Paldean Fates, and Shrouded Fable regular ETBs. So from that list, I still am the biggest fan probably of Paradox, SV Base at these prices, Temporal, and maybe even Paldea, because Paldea I don't know if we'll get any more reprints, but Temporal I picked up a few months ago. I'm not as keen on picking it up at 135, but who knows, could keep running and maybe it doesn't get a huge reprint. Now when we sort by the top 3 cards in each set, so the sum of the top 3 cards, it does end up getting a little bit more interesting. We have Surging Sparks still, Paldean Fates with that Mew and Charizard. Then we got Twilight Masquerade, which is heavily just carried by the Greninja. We have 151, which is Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur, or Charizard, Venusaur, Blastoise, I guess. Paldea Evolved, heavily carried by the Magikarp. Temporal Forces coming in there quickly behind Paldea Evolved, which I'm a huge fan of. Stellar Crown, which is about $75 drop off from Temporal to Stellar Crown, which again, maybe it's because it's a newer set. But actually what's interesting is that Shrouded Fable for top 3 and top 10 you'll see is actually not as bad as it seems. It's doing better still than Paradox Rift, Obsidian Flames, and SV Base in terms of the top 3 chase cards of that set. Now it's worth noting, like we previously said, I believe the Earthen Vessel and Pheasantipity, I know the Earthen Vessel is, but the Pheasantipity as well I think are mainly as expensive as they are because of their playability. I don't know about the Cassiopeia's playability, but that's just something to keep in mind. You know, take what I'm saying about Shrouded with a grain of salt. All I'm trying to say is that, you know, people dog on that set so much, but it's still more expensive for those top 3 and top 10 cards than some of these other sets that everyone's, you know, preaching to the choir about. I do really like Paradox still at its current prices. I think Paradox is still probably the most undervalued set. Scarlet and Violet base only $86 with the top 3 cards. So you really might want to look at that Gardevoir and Miriam a second time and maybe some of those IRs as well. So now we're looking at the top 10 cards sorted from high to low. So it does have some switch ups actually. So we still have Surging at the top, but instead of Paldean Fates, we go to Twilight Masquerade. 151 actually because of how deep that set is with the SIRs and IRs. Then we have Paldean Fates. Then we have Temporal Forces actually is more expensive with the top 10 cards than Paldea Evolved, which is something to really be watching out for, I think, when some of these cards continue to move. Then we have Paldea Evolved, and then we have Shrouded Fable. Shrouded Fable with the top 10 cards is still beating out Stellar, Paradox, SV Base, and Obsidian Flames. Again, not saying to invest in Shrouded Fable, I'm just saying it might not be as bad as everyone says it is, especially with some of those IRs like I was talking about. Then we have Stellar Crown essentially at the exact same price as Shrouded. Paradox Rift, which again is probably my favorite sleeper set. SV Base actually beats out Obsidian Flames here, and so I do think there's a case to be made, again, like I was talking about at the beginning, of some of those top SIRs and a few of the IRs actually having a lot more depth than a set like Obsidian Flames, which is pretty much just carried by the Charizard and a few of the more expensive IRs. But yeah, that's going to be it for the video. If you guys made it this far, I really appreciate you so much for watching all this way through. Again, if you haven't, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel, comment what your favorite set is or your most undervalued set in your opinion, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one soon. Peace.